Live, it says. All right. Let's get you back on the screen.
Okay.
Morning, Tara.
Morning.
We are now live streaming, and Tara Swanson is with me, Aaron Sanders, this Agile guy today, to talk about the tools needed to build psychological safety. So Tara, tell us a little bit about what is psychological safety?
Sure. Well, it's good to see you, Aaron. It's been
Nice to see you.
a few years.
Couple anyway.
What was that?
A couple anyway.
A couple. What is psychological safety? Great question, because I think it's a term that gets thrown around really loose and fast. And I think the initial, at least my initial understanding of it when I heard it, I thought, oh, well, psychological safety is like being safe and cozy and like feeling good and feeling warm and supported. And that's really just, it's kind of an adjacent meaning to that. It's really about having teams, leaders, and organizations feel safe enough to take risks. And by risks, I don't mean, pushing something to prod just by the seat of your pants and trying all this experimental stuff without some planning being put into place, but really being intentional about the way that you take risks and feeling supported by that.
I see. Not just warm and fuzzy feeling.
Right.
But now I can maybe show up authentically, take some risks. What would a risk look like with the right kind of psychological safety?
What would a risk look like? So I'll give an example. Actually, I'll give an example from my Dev Jam days when I first started there. So when I first started at Dev Jam, which is, for those who don't know, a small software shop that was in South Minneapolis and is now C Prime, I was kind of a jack of all trades. I did a lot of different things. And within my first few weeks, I was responsible for David Hussman, the owner's schedule, and making sure he was where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to be. And he called me from, let's see, I think it was Washington, D.C., and was like, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm good. And he said, hey, just so you know, I'm on the East Coast. I'm actually supposed to be giving a keynote at Intel right now in Oregon. And my heart just like dropped to my stomach. I could not stop apologizing. And he was like, you know what? It's okay. These things happen. And I wanted you to set yourself up for success by trying to experiment with being a jack of all trades and doing multiple things at once. And these sort of things are going to happen. It's not a big deal. And that sort of mentality of still being supportive of me, not punishing me for doing something wrong, and recognizing that I already knew that it was a mistake and I'd learned from it, enabled me to continue to push in my career at that gig. I was able to experiment with building more coaches, both in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and outside of it. I was able to help folks get organized to teach classes on site like yourself. So it really enables folks to step up and into their role and try things and not be afraid to fail. Do I wish it had not been a keynote? Yeah.
Well, yeah.
But these things happen, and it's really about having learnings to take away from it. And when it comes to Agile teams working together, that can look like, maybe there is a portion of code that touches other things that folks are kind of like wary of touching. They're worried that they're going to break a bunch of other stuff. So maybe it's just sat for a while because nobody wants to be blamed. It can look like someone picking that up and saying, hey, does someone want to pair with me to try this? And having them work on it together and have a sense of co-ownership and being supported by leadership, which is really important. Having managers, coaches, and senior leadership recognize those things as innovative ideas. And if we're going to continue to be innovative companies, we have to be able to propel ourselves forward. So we have to take risks.
Right. And having executives leadership that are okay with learning, which I feel like is synonymous to fail. We fail, make a mistake, reflect, learn, grow. So having that fault tolerance in the organization is important so that you can try things, know that if it goes a little wrong, you learn and move forward.
Right, exactly. And I think that, when I've met with, as a coach, when I go into organizations, if I meet with senior leadership and start to get to know them, you can get a real good sense of where folks are at in terms of being intentional about building that psychological safety. Before you even get to the communication piece, do people feel like they're able to be innovative? Does it feel like they're just being asked to kind of shovel work, or are they being supported and being recognized as something more than just a resource, for lack of a better term, but really being a human and working together with one another? I hear leaders use words like, obviously, collaboration and trust is a big one. So are we trusting the folks who are building what our customers or our users are asking for to do the right thing, and that they have the best interest of the customers and users at heart? And when I hear that sort of language, I know that folks are kind of on the right track, right?
Sure. Are there questions or way that you try to detect that right or wrong language? How do you find these conversations and patterns?
So if I'm working with teams, when I first get to know them, I meet with folks one-on-one and just have conversations about where the team is at. And as you know, like, all Agile coaches have their own niche. Some folks are about, academia and metrics and frameworks. And for me, it's always been about the human side. I was an English major. I didn't go to school for engineering. So for me, it's really about getting a pulse on the culture of the organization. So I talk a bit, I ask open-ended questions about, tell me what it's like to work on this team in your sprints. What does that normally look like for you in a week or 2 weeks, whatever that cadence is for them? And oftentimes you'll hear things like, well, usually, I'd like to hear that there's collaborative conversations going on, because obviously from an Agile perspective, you want to hear that sort of thing. But I'm also looking for, is there a safe place where you can step into a role where you're able to experiment with things and not have a flag go up and have it be like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. And I don't know how to describe it other than, and it's been tricky working remotely, because often it's a physical body response. Like 80% of our communication is body language.
What do you mean by that?
Something about Agile principles, something.
Something about interactions, people.
Yeah, something
process.
about exactly. So I look for it on Zoom calls, but you'll see people kind of look down, and they don't feel confident about it. When they talk about their work, it's like they feel like they don't own it. So they kind of tuck within themselves, and you can physically see it happen sometimes. Other times, when I have conversations with folks who really feel confident about the work that they're building, there's just a more relaxed energy. It's not like these expectations have been forced upon them, but rather they have been a part of those conversations about expectations. There's a shared understanding about what does it mean to build something that might entail, a bit of risk, and are you able to safely talk about that with leaders and have them understand why we need to be able to take those risks? So I kind of look for both body language and communication about where they're at.
It sounds to me like with lower levels of psychological safety, you hear people say things like, I can't believe they said that, or where was that coming from? Who decided that? And feeling decoupled from decisions.
Exactly. So it just feels like they show up and someone tells them, here's the work that you're going to be doing, so go do it. And kind of a symptom of that is when you work with a team. So let's say the dynamic of an organization has changed. A new leader has come in. Maybe they were under someone who was command and control, and now they're with someone who is much more pragmatic, really trying to give folks the freedom to do what they want. That behavior doesn't just go away. It's a learned behavior that they've it's like a habit. It's like anything else that you've done for so long, it's really hard to undo. So a lot of times when I go into organizations like that, and I see teams who are trying to own their own stuff, they really want to, it's hard for them to kind of find where to start. So, if the product owner kind of says, I think we're on the same page, y'all know what's coming up next, where do you think we should go? there's a lot of blank stares, and there's a lot of kind of looking around like, who wants to be the first person to actually experiment with this? And that's something that grows over time. And that's really where we as coaches, I feel, can step in and say, how can we help you find your voice? How can we start to get stronger? So psychological safety in and of itself is necessary, but we also have to give folks the tools to be able to help build it. So things like radical candor, which is something that's been used in and outside of IT, but that is a really practical and useful tool to get folks to understand how we communicate and where we want to fall. Like, where are we aiming when we're talking? Do we want to make sure we're sharing a message that is both intentional and empathetic, but we're also not being so empathetic that we're kind of like, in Minnesota, we call it Minnesota nice, but you're just being so nice. You don't want to, somebody maybe built something wrong and you don't want to say anything. So you kind of
on toes.
Don't. Exactly. And in radical candor world, that's called ruinous empathy. So you're trying to be nice, but you're being so nice that you're really not helping this. You're not helping the situation. You're not helping yourself, and you're really not helping that person improve. And so when these teams first start working together, it's really important as coaches for us to really let them start to understand where they fall when it comes to talking with one another. How do you approach a conversation? What do you do when you're collaborating with someone and you have a different point of view about the way that they're building something, or you feel like we should be focusing on X instead of Y? What is your approach like? And kind of getting to that place of radical candor, which is also not, it's a grid of 4, and it's ruinous empathy, which is like above and beyond too nice, Minnesota nice. We have—
No, you go. No, please.
No, please, you go. You have manipulative insincerity, which is you're not personally invested in something, and you just kind of let things roll off your shoulders because you don't really care if this person improves or if you improve. You're just kind of done with it.
What's that?
And then that's called manipulative insincerity. So it also can be like a political game. If you're being fake and you're just kind of showing up to things because you know that this is the game you have to play, but you're not fully invested in it, you're not putting your best self forward. And then obnoxious aggression kind of speaks for itself when someone's a jerk and not only doesn't have empathy, but they also have no filter. And I've seen this happen in organizations in the past where sometimes I've worked on the East Coast for a while, and I'm from the East Coast. And sometimes I think that it's like, oh, well, that's just how I am. I'm just like, I've got a hard edge. It's like, well, yeah, you can have our hard edge, but brutal honesty should not be brutal. We can take the brutality out of it and make it honest and challenge someone directly to get them get yourself and that other person into that radical candor space where you're showing up to say, you know what? I was witness to that meeting. It really went off the rails because of X, Y, Z. How do you think that we could approach this differently next time? Kind of open it up so that it's not just you saying, what was your problem? Because that immediately shuts people down, right? In an environment where they haven't been able to talk, it's like a double negative.
And as a coach, you're reflecting the conversations people have. How are you showing them where they fall without them reacting in a negative way?
I think the best way to show them where they fall is to just really be honest with them, really have an intentional conversation about what I've witnessed. And all I can do is show up and say, here, so there's a formula that I like to use, SBI. So it's situation, behavior, impact. So when you have a conversation with someone and you don't want to make it personal, because you shouldn't, but you really want to get your point across, you talk about the situation that you witnessed, you talk about the behavior that may or may not have impacted other people. And then after that, like, what comes next? So here are the things that I witnessed.
The what?
Leave it. Don't feel like you need to fill the room when there's silence. Let that person kind of digest. But do so, you also have to consider, have that conversation privately. Probably don't have it publicly at a stand-up.
Yeah, good
And
idea.
also, yeah, and also just recognize that not everyone processes things immediately. I think that that's something that that's probably been one of my biggest challenges as a coach. I'm very much like this kind of person where I like to go, go, go. And I'm married to someone who really needs time to process. So it's taught me I can't expect everyone to have an answer right away. I need to wait for them to kind of come to me and be ready to have a response.
So it sounds like this is helping with your own practice around patience and
Yeah,
listening and empathy.
absolutely.
So maybe
Absolutely.
you lay the what out there and
Yep.
wait for them to come back and then start to talk about behavior, or I think about the gut, like how that behavior made me feel or others. Is that
Right.
the behavior part?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the behavior part is trusting your gut, but also watching for the impact that it has on others. Because oftentimes when you're coaching, you're in a situation where it's not just one person, it's many. So if you see
Hmm.
someone come into a room and, let's say they're having like a grooming session or something and someone starts griping about another team and the whole meeting goes off the rails because this one person is really frustrated, I'll kind of make a mental note of, hey, it's as soon as this meeting is over, I'm going to grab that person and just say, hey, can we chat for a minute? And
Hmm.
just kind of share what my immediate feedback was and kind of see what they have to say about it. Where are you at and where are you coming from? And I think that sometimes it can kind of stun people when it's caught in the moment. But I've also had people thank me after that to say, like, thank you for not waiting 2 weeks to tell me something like that, because at that point it doesn't matter anymore. And that issue is under the bridge because we all move so quickly in this industry. Things change so fast. So it's really important to catch it in the moment.
And pile up so fast.
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking about too is maybe this person is reacting here, but it's something else way over there that is bothering them.
Right.
If you catch them in a moment, maybe they can start to unpack that and figure out those layers and why they're
Exactly.
behaving like that. Because I find
Right.
it's usually not so related to the situation, something adjunct.
Right. And so when you start doing that digging, you discover that maybe it wasn't even about the thing they were frustrated about at all. Maybe something's
Mm-hmm.
going on at home. Um, maybe COVID or 2020. I mean, there's like a
Maybe.
million, maybe things have been a
Maybe.
little weird this year, but I think it's,
Really?
yeah,
Oh, how
people,
about that?
people have been having a tough time this year, a little bit.
I know.
And I think it's important to lead with the humanity side of things. This is such an interesting industry to be in. I mean, like I mentioned, I was an English major and I wanted to be a professor when I started going to school. And now it's like I am teaching adults, but I'm also getting to learn myself. And when I teach workshops or programs about psychological safety and these sort of tools that we use to help build it, I kind of start with a grounding. Like, let's all come in with curiosity, with humility, and
Mhm.
recognize that we are all on this learning path together. No one knows everything about humans. That is not a thing that exists. It's like any agile journey. There's not an end point where you reach it and you're like, I'm good. I get it all.
Good. Know everything about every human.
Exactly. I'm done. Amy Edmondson is the person who coined the term psychological safety. I'm like number one fan. She's amazing. And
Mhm.
when you watch interviews with her, she's very humble and she takes a very pragmatic approach to people talking. And I think that when you lead with that sort of humility, and when we try and do that as coaches or as leaders in any organization, you get a lot more from that than when you fall somewhere else on that kind of radical candor spectrum, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Having lived in the Bay Area, California, radical candor is everywhere. I
Yeah.
maybe started there.
It did.
And now,
Yeah.
okay. Some people that were practicing it would say things like, why do you look so sad? I thought that's so interpretive.
Yeah.
Where does that fall when you're being honest,
Yeah.
but it's not received? And how do you get past that?
That's a good question. I feel like it did start in California, but I'm like racking my brain a little bit about it now. But either way, I just got a new version of the book, and Kim Scott does an intro. She revised the intro, and she called out that sort of behavior that she started to see. Apparently, there's an episode of Silicon Valley where a guy is embodying that sort of behavior and he's definitely falling into obnoxious aggression and calling it radical candor because he's really being forthcoming. And I feel like one of the reasons for that, I actually had an interesting conversation with some coaches I work with yesterday about this. One of the examples that Kim Scott uses for when she first experienced radical candor given to her was with Sheryl Sandberg when she was at Google, and she had just gotten done giving a speech, and Sheryl stopped her and said, I just wanted to let you know you say a lot. And Kim said, oh yeah, I know that's a thing that I'm working on. Sheryl said, can we help set you up with a speech coach or someone who can kind of help you work through that? And Kim just kind of brushed it off and said, nah, I mean, it's something that I know is an issue. And Sheryl said, I don't think that you're hearing me. When you say when you're speaking, it makes you sound stupid. And that kind of made her jump back. And I think, though, I don't know that I'm okay with that language, because even if it's just saying someone looks stupid, there's a dangerous implication there, right? I mean, it can really, I feel like not only is it going to shock someone, but there may be some trauma associated. And I think she rewrote that. I can't speak for Kim, but I feel like she rewrote that introduction to just say, let's be really intentional with our language. And as an English major nerd, I kind of feel the same way. Like, what if instead of saying it made you feel stupid or it made you sound stupid, what if you said it made you sound like you don't know what you're talking about? Those sound like such different things. One is it makes you sound like you don't know what you're talking about when you actually do. The other is kind of a shot at like your intelligence. So let's just be real careful about the language we use. So I recommend to anyone watching and to yourself, like, to pick up a new copy of it, because I think it's worth rereading that introduction where she is like, you know what, I clearly made some mistakes when I wrote this. I'm not a perfect human, surprise. And I think that, I think there are better ways that we could do this.
We'll put a link in the comments to the book, and any other references, let me know. I'll put them in the comments for afterwards.
Excellent. Great. I will do that.
Yeah, I also think about maybe approaching it from my side to say to this person, you said every 45 seconds. Something on that what side that is fact-filled as possible. And then how it makes me feel. I'm uncomfortable. I lose track of what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how we can get past this. As opposed to saying you, right? It makes you look stupid. How does it make me feel? Is that part of this radical candor?
I think that that's certainly part of it. Being able to provide context for something and also recognize, like, when is the right time to say something. Mm-hmm. If you yourself need a minute, like I've been in conversations where things get really heated and where I witness something that I'm not okay with. I know about myself also, because I've been learning more patience, to maybe just wait instead of just immediately calling that person and saying, hey, let's talk about this right now, because I know that it's not their best interest. If the purpose of radical candor is to challenge directly and have empathy, I don't know if all the empathy will be there. So I might need to give myself a little bit of time to just kind of cool down, Boston born, I can get a little, riled up. So I might just need to give myself a minute, and that's okay. So I give myself a minute or two, maybe even like half a day. And then once I gather myself, talk to that person about, and I'll even write out a plan. If I know that it's going to be an intense conversation, especially if it's not someone on a team. Let's say a few years ago, I was working out of Buffalo, New York, and I worked with a few development teams and also worked with some directors and some senior leadership. If I was walking into a conversation where I had to provide feedback from something I witnessed, I always wrote it down first so that I had it clear in my mind. What's the message that I want to send? Is there empathy? Am I being direct? And am I going to allow for this person to explore why their behavior was that way?
I'm recalling a situation. This guy was being a pretty big jerk, and other people were coming to me as I was the coach and saying, I can't work with this person. They
Yeah.
keep doing such mean things. And I was watching it, observed that in a workshop, and just said, let's take a break, and pulled him aside and talked to him. I was shaking. I
Oh, yeah.
was, I mean, not only mad, but nervous and scared to say something to them and not
Right.
avoid the conflict. I don't know if
Yeah.
the timing was right, but
But it was the moment that you chose, right? And I like that you talked about how you were shaking. So that's kind of an important piece here, which isn't necessarily specific to radical candor, but your nervous system is constantly talking to you. We don't always listen to it. And so when there is that sort of trembling, oftentimes that's kind of, this sounds like really woo woo and hippie, but that's energy moving. There's a lot of work done. I have a friend who is a somatic experience therapist. So it's all
mhm,
about getting people to experience things through their body, because a lot of times we like to not listen. And then when our body gets really stressed, it kind of implodes or explodes. But when
yeah,
your body is trembling, it's starting to move stuff, and it's telling you like, whoa, I feel kind of unsafe and kind of unsure about this, but you kind of let yourself be your own guide, and kind of share what you're ready to share in that moment. And I don't know that there is ever like a right time. You just kind of hope for the best when you do that. And there are times where you're going to get it wrong. Like, I have
mhm,
gotten it wrong so many times where I thought, you know what, should have just probably like waited, or maybe I waited too long. It's all about that continuous improvement, right? Like,
yeah.
maybe take a look at, where did I hear this? I feel like I read it on LinkedIn recently, but I loved it. I need to go back and look. But somebody suggested at the end of every week saying, what was the best failure you had this week? And that it should fall into some communication, like some conversations that you've had throughout the week that you wish had gone differently, so that you can look back and say, how would I have done that differently? So that maybe next time, maybe if you were in that situation again with somebody where you needed to kind of pull them aside, maybe you'd wait a little bit. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe your gut will tell you in that moment, like, let's do this now. Let's just talk about this, get it over with.
I was afraid people were going to rage quit. So I really had to address that. It went
Yeah,
beyond how I felt.
right.
If I had to do it again, I might go on a walk to try to move that energy, as you were talking
Exactly.
about. Instead of sitting in a conference room shaking, let's
Right.
go on a walk. Let's talk for a minute and get some air.
Right. Yeah. David Hussman, when I worked at Dev Jam, he used to call those Mardi Gras. I don't know why he called them that. It was just like his thing.
A little parade.
But
Did he have an umbrella?
no umbrella. Nope. Just typical dude, like camping,
Yeah,
pants and everything. But
sure.
when there were intense things happening, we would always go on a walk. I love that point. And that really does, and that's tricky right now. But I would
Yes.
encourage folks to, even if you are remote and you're having a conversation with someone, and I don't do this enough, and actually after this conversation, I'm going to make sure I do it more. If I
Okay.
have to talk to someone, you don't have to do it sitting in front of a computer. You can go
Mm,
for a walk. Go for a walk and process with that person. It doesn't have to be, yes, face to face is great. But
mhm,
if you feel like you need to move, then move.
yeah. This moves with me. I
And it
could do
moves with you, right?
FaceTime,
You can do
Zoom.
video or
Yeah.
whatever you want. Exactly.
Have face to face, little nature walk.
Nature walk. Yeah,
Yeah. I like
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
If you found yourself failing in this building psychological safety with somebody, when you come back around and let that person know, hey, I failed over here. Let's try it again.
Um, I mean, what I really hope to see in organizations is that we're talking about this at a cadence, right? So we have time to pause. There's going to be time within the teams to talk about, I would hope that it would come up, like with my teams, I want to see that come up in a retrospective. If someone experienced something that like did not feel good,
Mhm.
and not that it's just this fluffy, it didn't feel good, it's that it ends up getting in the way and ends up costing money and time and all of this other stuff. What was it? A question that I get a lot from teams in any organization I've been with is, this stuff is great for me, but what about leadership? Are they going to be practicing this too? That's always their question. Are they going to practice it? And my hope is, and my experience has been with senior leadership, when they are working through that stuff, you have to have time set aside, maybe like once a month, to kind of check in and say, where do we feel like we're growing culturally? So it's kind of like a retro for leaders. Where are we growing culturally? Where are we seeing gaps? Mm-hmm. Where are we seeing things kind of fall through the cracks? What does retainment look like over the past month? Why are folks leaving? Do we have that data? Are we able to get that data? So it kind of bleeds into a little bit of, I wouldn't necessarily call it specific human resources, but that's coaching kind of does lead into that, because if you have a bunch of people who are rage quitting or who you are afraid of rage quitting, as a coach, especially if you're working in a consulting capacity, you got to bring that up and have that conversation with executives. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then it's time to pause.
Yeah. How do you help others pause or reflect on their language? Because it's so real time, and we have all these biases too, right? Anchor bias, planning fallacy, optimism bias. How do we detect that?
It's a great question. So I think that doing exercises is really helpful. Having folks work with one another in like a workshop capacity, because if you just sit down and do like a psychological safety workshop or giving and receiving feedback or whatever, and it's a one and done, it's not going to stick. Just like anything else, you're going to learn it and you might take away like a few tidbits, but it's really important to keep coming back to that. And actually right now I'm kind of exploring, like, what does that look like to continue this thread, to continue this conversation? If we have, a team of 8 people and we're talking about active listening. So we're all on Zoom right now. We're all talking to one another. There are different stages of active listening. How do we, can we go into pairs? Because like, I know Teams has breakout rooms now. With Zoom, you can have breakout rooms, I believe. You can work with another person and have them not tell you which kind of area they're in active listening. Like, is it just cosmetic? Are they really deeply interested in what you're hearing about? And experience it for yourself so that you get a good understanding of what other people are grappling with. Because it's really hard for us to do that when, to your point, when we communicate, it's in the moment. We can't really take it back. It exists, and we can learn from that. But how do we, just like anything else, how do we get better at it? We have to practice. We have to continue. Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
And that active listening is a good one. Sometimes I'll ask people to not listen. Pair up. Somebody's going to talk. The other person, stay distracted. See what you can do to not listen. And they're so embarrassed. And of course they're listening. And use that for the next round. Okay, really listen. Go there as much as you can. Vicariously listen.
Exactly. I love that. I think that's a really important exercise. I've also had teams do that. And when I have them come back, I say, how did it go? And they're like, that was awkward. And I felt like a jerk. I'm like, when you're talking to somebody on Zoom and they're not paying attention, they're like over here typing or they're on their phone.
Sorry, multitasking.
Right. Multitasking. And you can tell that someone's not invested. Many, many years ago, I used to work with someone who and they were a product owner. Every time we sat down together, they were in their laptop. And we would sit down and they would just immediately go here. And like no active listening happening in one day, because it's me and everybody has a different approach. I just went over and kind of shut the laptop a little bit. He laughed. I mean, we had a good rapport. So he understood the message I was trying to send. I said, are you aware that when we meet, you're always on your laptop? And, he immediately apologized and said, I know, I'm sorry. You're a product owner and had probably too many teams and so much going on. I totally understand that and empathize, but I want you to know that this is what you're putting out there. And I hope that kind of stuck with him and that he understood, like, geez, I'm really not present when that's going on. And I've done it too. I actually wrote a blog for Keystone. They're a coaching organization in the Twin Cities a couple of months ago about how to kind of be intentional with your time. As a coach, oftentimes we are looked upon as, it's like you're part of the team, but you're also kind of part of leadership, and you're in this middle area, but they want to
feel like a pinball.
Yeah, you do. Right. No, it's a great analogy. You feel like a pinball. You're like shooting all over the place. And so, you know, I used an example of having a laptop up in a meeting, and I was working on something and the team was planning. And in that moment, I checked out. I just checked out because my email came up and I got distracted. And then they asked me a question and I'm like, what? Just nothing. I did not hear anything that you just said. Sorry. And I apologized.
Just got a wind blowing through.
Exactly. And
let's do that again.
Yeah. And it's happened to everyone and it's embarrassing, but a way that I found to help that not happen so much is to take a Post-it and write "be present" on it and stick it right on my laptop. It helped me immensely. So every time I tried to like go to my keyboard and I would get distracted, I kind of stopped myself and said, maybe don't do that. Be present. Be respectful.
Yeah. For me, one practice is 1 minute meditation. Just sit and try to focus on my breath. Don't manage it. Just feel it.
Yep.
And if I can do that for a minute, I'm pretty present. I can do a workshop, facilitate that.
Yeah, I love that, Aaron. I am so sharing that. 1 minute meditation. That's great.
Yeah. Try to count breaths.
Yeah.
You might get to 1 or 2. And then if your mind goes elsewhere, focus again and count. And like meditation goes, let the feelings, emotions flow through you. Try to focus on the breath. Don't manage it.
Right. And that's also another great way. Yeah. That's another great way to kind of neutralize your nervous system, right? So if you're feeling scattered and all over the place, which I have found myself many times during the day, having just a few moments or using an app like Headspace, which I definitely used as a traveling coach, really great way to just take 5 minutes or whatever to get centered and drop in and chill out. And the interesting thing is, I love that we're talking about, I love that you suggested meditation and talk about like the nervous system. I think a lot of times that stuff can be so dismissed as like, not fluff, but should it exist when we're talking about, agility and Scrum and all this stuff. And it's like, heck yeah, it should. If we're humans and if we're talking about like our work self and our normal self, we're doing ourselves such a disservice, right? Like we are one being. We can just show up as us, but we need to be in a safe enough spot to be able to do that. And if we're not in a safe spot, then let's at least start talking about it. You got to start somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. The head to heart connection. And I agree. We come up these corporate personas and think we have to behave a certain way.
Right.
And I always think about, how can I be one integrated Aaron?
Oh, I love that. One integrated Tara. She is but one. Yeah. I love that. I think that's so important because think of how much you leave out if you're just showing up as this persona. I think when I was a kid and I would watch TV and, I'm like 9 or 10 and you watch this is like the 80s, right? So like business suits and, people showing up to their jobs and looking all classy. And I was like, I remember wondering, so do you suit up literally and just kind of put on a face and that's your work face? I really wondered if that was a thing, but as I've grown,
I think it still is a thing.
I think it is still a thing, but I will say that in my career, I can't believe it's almost been 8 years that I've been in technology. The most amazing coaches that I've witnessed have been the ones who show up as themselves. Like David Hussman never put on a fake facade. He was himself. Former
you don't
coach
have to triangulate with that kind of person. You know exactly where they're coming from. Might not like it, might not agree with it, but I know where you are.
I know where you are. Exactly. Or, well, like Amy Edmondson, we've been talking about psychological safety. She doesn't show up as, some different version of her. There's a feeling of someone being genuine. And when you are genuine, people feel it. People can tell. So when you show up genuine with a team, they're going to know. And if you show up not genuine, they're also going to know. They'll see right through it. That was, I think, some of the best advice I ever got as a coach. Like, never fake it, because they will see right through you. And that is, I have experienced that. I'm like, well, what if I just, I really show up and just kind of be my most perfect self? That doesn't exist. And it's going to come crashing down real fast. Real fast. You don't need to do that. Unnecessary.
I'm a little bit of a goof, sometimes cheeseball. I know that. And I see people react to that, me being goofy, but they don't like it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, myself.
No, well, me neither. I'm a total weirdo. I always have been. And for a long time, prior to my experience in technology, I worked in healthcare for about a decade.
Okay.
So I came into IT totally by accident. But I really wasn't myself. I was a manager in a mental health clinic. I worked in project management for a database research company. But I really didn't show up as me. I was, I don't think I was also very invested. Like, you have to care deeply about what you're doing to really be able to make an impact. And we do ourselves such a disservice when we're not ourselves. And when I got into technology and I started seeing, like, I think the most beautiful thing about the IT space is people so way more often than not are themselves, especially at a team level. Folks show up as them, and teams are as eclectic and diverse as can be. You've got folks who are super introverted and who will be like, they'll game for 14 hours straight, and then you've got people who are communications majors and they ended up loving coding, and so now they're in that role. And directors who just have like really fascinating interests, and I feel like a lot of that seeps through in technology. So we should really like make space for that and honor that.
Agreed.
Every retrospective doesn't need to be this canned, rigid, what we learn and what went wrong. Let's talk about shared interests. I've found that to be immensely helpful during this time of COVID. Getting people to talk, just starting a conversation with, I try and shy away from icebreaker, not because I really maybe I do have an issue with the word, but it feels awkward. It's like a stamp of awkwardness. Like, here you go.
Here's the prescription, stamp, awkward.
Yep. So instead, I just, without even saying anything, I'll just say, favorite activity to do in the summer, go. Thing that you're binging on Netflix right now, go. And just get people talking. And it's kind of like, I actually work with my own coach because I think it's so important as a coach, to have a coach who has talked a lot about how it's like stirring a pot. It's like you're cooking and you're kind of mixing things together when you've got a stick that everyone's using to kind of proverbially pass it. And we're mixing it up together. People are finding their voice. They're starting to talk. And then we're starting to move. We're starting to experience things together. And that leads to us being able to have those conversations about, how do we take risks together? How do we get to know each other better? It's really by talking. We have to communicate first. You can code all day long, but you need to know how to talk to each other.
This shows up in Bill Campbell's book, The $1 Trillion Coach. It was written post-mortem by Eric Schmidt and others. And he would start his staff meeting on Monday morning with a trip report. How was the weekend? What did you do? If you had something interesting, you have a little airtime. And he made sure to make those social, personal connections before going through the business. Every Monday, this is the CEO and his staff. I thought, that's great. I've been doing this. I found that so validating, to talk genuinely about something, whatever, going on, and see what comes back to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to lead to, it's like almost having a mind map where somebody brings something up and other people are like, oh, me too. And I did something related to that. Have you ever been to blah, blah, blah? It's so great to just have those Like we have to have that common connection now more than ever when people feel isolated. And even if you live with other people, like maybe you're living with kids where you're having a tough time focusing, or it's just like you and your partner, whatever it might be, and you're trying to connect with other people, connect by whatever means necessary and connect in a human way. So I love that. I think that that's great. A trip report.
I got a general manager to tell me about his time in the Boy Scouts and how they grew pot plants in the gutter on top of the roof. Nobody could find it. I thought, nice. Man, I'm learning a lot about this person.
Scheming. You really are. Wow.
Where they break rules. All sorts of things.
Right. I've learned.
It wasn't just the story.
No. And you learn fascinating things about people. I worked with an engineer a few years ago, and we had, we would have these conversations. I like to do like maybe every 2 or 3 retros, we do something that's just totally off the cuff, like 2 truths and a lie or something that's fun. Mm-hmm. And I learned that he was in the circus for years. Like he was a circus hand and did all this. I would never have known that. And then like had all these fascinating conversations about what does that look like? And how do you move from town to town? And how do you know where to go? And you just learn fascinating things about other people. And then you have a connection.
They stick with you.
They totally
Absolutely. Stick. Those connections stay around.
Yeah. Or even when my partner and I moved out to this house in Excelsior, Minnesota, a little over a year ago. And when we moved in, so did some mice. Oh. And and it came up in a retro, and I actually bonded with the same person who was in the circus about this. And he had all this helpful feedback because he'd had the same problem. It's really just about like making these connections and then enjoying the time that you have with other people just to get to know each other better. It doesn't have to be it can't be all business, because we are not all business as people. We're just not.
I like to say all business is personal.
All business is personal. Yeah. When people say things like, it's not personal, it's business, that's a myth. It is personal.
And watch out for the knife in your back, whoever just said that.
Right. Exactly. I mean, you have to come to the table with your humanity and try and lead with it. I feel like that was the biggest responsibility for me when I started coaching. I was like, I just don't want to like make anyone feel like they're in a harmful place. But I think that also led to me exploring my own practices and ruinous empathy. Like, am I being so nice that I'm being too nice and now this person isn't growing? I was also an engineering manager for a few years. And that's when you have to have those tough conversations about, is this person doing what's expected of them? And how can I look for opportunities to help them grow more? It's not going to help them grow if I'm like, yeah, you're fine. It's okay. It's okay. It was, you've been struggling, but you'll get better. Well, they're not going to get better unless you're direct about what happened, but also have that empathy. So those two kind of work hand in hand.
Makes sense. So people can pick up what you're putting down,
exactly.
Especially when it's uncomfortable.
Yes. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Yeah.
A couple of different, maybe 3 questions. Do you put this in working agreements with teams?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. If there can be, I want to see at least one thing on the behavioral side. There can be, a lot of, working agreements are often about behavior, right? So it's, maybe it's no negative spinning and making sure we, 2 people test things before it even moves on to QA, whatever that might be. But I want to see something about the way that we work with not just one another, but other teams. Because if we have our own little ecosystem here and we have we're building psychological safety, how do we start to push that out? How do we start to kind of share the message of the way that we work? So I really like to see that in working agreements. Great question.
Nice. Great. Virtually, have any tips for us? How do we do this?
I would say that it's good to establish, if you can, maybe a time that you do have your cameras on. I've seen teams that do cameras on, cameras off, or nobody wants to do it at the same time. I had a team kind of come together and say in a retrospective, like, let's all actually, during part of a psychological safety workshop, they said, let's all have our cameras on during retros. It's the one time when we're really talking about the stuff that's impacting all of us personally. So let's have cameras on. So I would say, if you can establish one time to do that, and if somebody can't, that's okay. Like, let's not belittle them or make them feel bad, but try and find one time where you're able to do that if possible.
Okay.
I think it helps.
I agree. So many places have video conferencing and people mute their videos all day long, every meeting.
Yeah. I always feel responsible as the coach, so I'm on most of the time. Unless I like really need to go get coffee or something, and then I'll put it down.
Having a bad hair day. I gotta mute.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, woke up late, gotta fix myself a little bit before I really bring it. So yeah, exactly. But I think being a little intentional with video time is good.
Great.
Yeah.
And then back to the failure learning mode.
Yeah.
When you do something and you're like, oh man, I messed that up. How do you shake that off and keep going?
When I personally mess something up?
Yeah, you're building this trust and psychological safety.
Yeah.
You did something, somebody reacts in a weird way. You realize it was based on you.
Yeah.
For me, that sits with me for a long time, sometimes years.
Sure.
Have any tools, practices to get past that?
For me, it kind of comes back to that patience thing. Like, let's be patient and kind to ourselves. So there's a nice little, it's like a little circular diagram I've seen with the psychological safety that goes from self to team to relationships to team to culture, but it starts with self. So we have to be psychologically safe with ourselves. Are we going to give ourselves the ability to take risks, and knowing that if we take those risks, sometimes they're not going to work out? So be kind to yourself. Just give yourself a little bit of breathing room, and recognize that it was hard. You made a point earlier, like it's hard to even talk to someone about that stuff. It was hard for you to do that. So just be kind to yourself and be patient, and know that we're all learning together. And that includes you. It's not like you get left out of the equation. It has to start there.
Makes a lot of sense. And watch out for that negative self-talk.
Absolutely.
I was reading somewhere, talk to yourself. Sounds weird. You're maybe evoking alters. But if you're in that negative self-talk, oh, stupid, gosh, dumb, why'd you do that? Then talk to that voice.
Yeah.
Why are you talking like that about yourself?
Exactly. I mean, I've heard coaches refer to that as like, it's like your inner child, man, being like, oh, I'm so bad at this. I'm so like, be nice. And you would never say that to another person, right? But you say it to you. Hopefully not. Hopefully you don't.
Me personally, I say this to myself a lot. I'm hard on myself.
Yeah.
Because I want to be better. I feel like there's something in that kind of skin on the mule. Hiya, let's go. That was dumb and stupid and wrong. You can do better. It's unhelpful, I find. It is. Around.
And it totally sticks, and it impacts us long term. You know, you do that enough times, it starts to feel really self-effacing, and you're going to have a really hard time leading other people when you do that. But I'm like you, Erin, I absolutely do that to myself. I expect a lot of myself, probably too much sometimes. And when I screw up, it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And it's a continuous work in progress for me to say, it's okay. You did that, and maybe reflect back at the end of the week. I am starting to do this kind of weekly, like weekend reflection of what are some things that you would like to change about what you did. And also, what are some awesome things that you did this week? And then you wrap up the week kind of say, and you don't have to do it with anyone else but yourself. And at the end of the week, you say, I did this cool stuff, which was hopefully helpful. I also did these things, which weren't great. Here's how I might want to do it better next time. It's like a self-retro a little bit.
I like that.
Yeah.
And end on a high note. So let's end on a high note. What are some great things going around you this week?
Yeah.
What are some highlights?
Oh, you're asking me about my week?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I met with some fellow coaches and shared some of this work that I'm doing kind of as a program to some engineering teams that I'm presently working with, which is super awesome. And I love to see. Also working with some teams who are having some changes in team dynamic, and I'm hopefully having some really productive conversations with them. That's TBD, because it's happening later this week.
Gotcha.
That I think will be really helpful to get them kind of in a good space and moving. And what else? On a personal note, it's beautiful outside here, so getting out for a few runs this week and just enjoying the weather. I'm in Minnesota. It's supposed to be 46 today. That's not common.
Tropical for Minnesota.
Completely tropical. I may get to run in shorts, Aaron. It's
wow.
Wild. Yeah. So I'm really enjoying that. Excellent. And yeah, and some things that I would like to work on already this week. I was trying to kind of define some things for myself with a little project that I'm working on that is kind of around, it's kind of like a word map for teams, but getting folks to kind of connect the dots with a few different things that similar teams are struggling with. I was having a really hard time kind of getting to something that was good enough. Reach out for help. That was my message to myself this week, was like, you don't have to struggle alone. Reach out for help. We are working in a very collaborative space, whether you are or not. Reach out for help, because people want to help. And I think it's really nice to get insight. Many minds can be greater than one.
Absolutely. In reaching out, I find just talk to people, anybody.
Yeah.
For me right now, I want to get back into horse riding. So I just say, do you know about horses? What do you think about horses? And suddenly I found this woman, she leases them. She trains, she trail rides.
All you got to do is ask.
Going next. Yeah, anyone, just ask around. Who knows where the help will come back from?
Exactly. I love that. Yes. Yeah. Ask for help. Always ask for help.
All right. Well, Tara,
that's it.
Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. This was great.
Excellent. Well, feel free to come back anytime.
I will do that. That sounds great. And then I'll share some of those book links with you as well. And I have a Medium account where I post articles, so I will share that too.
We'll get it all in the comments.
Excellent.
With this video.
Okay. Thanks so much. Take care. You too.
Thank you.
Bye.